The Hogsty is brought to you by TicketClub.com, your one-stop shop for live events nationwide. Whether you're looking for game, theater, or live performance tickets, don't sweat it. TicketClub.com has you covered. So make sure you're going there for all your live entertainment needs, and make sure you're clicking over to them from the banner at the top of thehogsty.com.
The Hogsty presents It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and Rich Rogers. And now, here's your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogsty Network, the show where we talk about the dollars and cents of the sports, industrial, media complex. This is a kind of our reboot inaugural show here as the core three are in the house after Rich went into the quiet night and John joined us, but I was not able to be on the maiden voyage, so here we are as a threesome. So John, welcome.
Hello, I've bought a new microphone just for this occasion.
Guess let me tell you something. Your audio stunk last time. No, hey, yeah, we kind of had a pregame. Episode last week. So I'm glad to have everybody here with us. We wish Rich the best of luck. He's still around. And John, welcome. Chris, welcome back from your scheduling nightmare, which was last week.
All right, so without further ado, John, do you have any wise words you want to open on?
I don't have any wise words at all, Chris.
All right.
So you should probably take it away.
Then let's go. We'll see what nuggets of wisdom we can dig up here. First, speaking of nuggets, we are starting to see the first wave of real interesting gambling industry, major sports industry come together. Just in the last week or last 10 days, we saw the NHL sign a deal with MGM Resorts, mark that name. We saw the New York Jets sign a deal with, wait for it, MGM Sports to do some interesting things with gaming. There is some slight differences. These are not the same contracts. And just so that we can score the hat trick here, if you were wondering who the first major pro sports league to sign a gambling contract was, it was actually the NBA with MGM Resorts. So we can already track a pattern here. Who is the gaming and hospitality industry giant who is going the most aggressive here now with 3 of the 4 sports? So just a whole lot going on. Really with the NBA and the NHL, these are partnerships to have specific sports gambling going on the league, and the important thing there is the data. So this is just giving MGM Resorts the ability to bring gamblers and guests data fast and deep so they can, feel like they're making smart bets. And with the Jets, it's actually a whole bunch of tailored gaming, almost mini games. Almost think of it like scratch-off lottery, where all these different in-game opportunities to win stuff, not money. There are some slight differences there and a lot of ways to slice and dice this. So as longtime listeners and new guests, John, you should know, I am definitely the Lord of House Vice on the podcast, and Steve is the Lord of House Virtue. So at first blush, let me say, I cannot wait to go spend a day in one of these sports books at some point in the middle future.
I'm going to take a guess right now that John's views are going to make you look like a part of House Virtue.
I'll tell you this much. So a little bit of background about me. There's maybe some people don't know much about me. I started out my career in the early 90s in America Online running fantasy sports. And fantasy sports at the time were very there was a lot of pushback, and this has been going on since that time as well. Is it gambling? Is it not gambling? Is it a game of skill? Is it a game of luck? Where does money get involved? And at the time, it was funny because also back then we worked with a small company run by a husband and wife team, John and Sue Dewan, called Stats Incorporated. And Stats Inc. was this tiny little firm. They used to pay college kids, I think, $10 to go to a game and get on the phone and tell people what the stats were as they were coming in. That's how they operated. So all of these have kind of come forward now. The gambling aspect, the statistics aspect, and and the online aspect. You now have a world where data can move at the speed of light, and you really can get to a point where there's going to be a phone app where you can bet on who's the next person that's going to score a goal, who's the next person that's going to take a penalty, and you can do that, at home, in the arena, wherever you are, where it's legal. So I don't consider myself a part of House Vice. I don't really gamble all that much, mostly because I understand the odds better than I want to. So I try to stay away from that. But I think that what we're looking at here is a situation where the internet has allowed the pool of money that's going on with sports gambling to grow so large that the leagues honestly just can't ignore it any longer. There's too much money for them to stay out of. They don't want to get involved because they don't want to be the Black Sox. They don't want to, they don't want to have these scandals going on. But at some point, that pile of money grows so big that Scrooge McDuck just can't help but jump into it. And I think we finally started to reach that point thanks to the internet and big data.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, because as we've always said, the theme on this show is money rules everything. It always does. And I'm not, I mean, my sole vice is probably my attempt to live vice-free, in some respects. But my problem with the gambling thing was always, when we talked about this before, it was the constitutional argument in the federal case, and I wasn't 100% sure that the pro-gambling industry was really going to win. But the bottom line, really and truly, is that the federal law was just a special interest protectionist law, more or less. It was keeping all the gambling money in a certain couple of states, and that went right out the window, which is probably good, because at the end of the day, the federal government shouldn't be the morality police. The state governments can rule their states as they see fit, but I think that's where the court shook out. But for me, I mean, my fundamental problem with gambling on sports is when the teams like the Jets and the NHL and the NBA get in bed with MGM. What is going to stop the Jets and the NHL and the NBA from fixing and corrupting the sport in order to set odds that are going to make more money for the gambling house, which I haven't read the contracts, but the contracts are paying the leagues and the teams, and team singular, a certain amount of money. And it probably has to do with how much revenue comes in. I could just take a guess on it.
So what I've read, I'm not saying you're right or wrong because I haven't looked at the contracts either. But from what I understand, there is a flat fee that's being transferred. What we're not talking about is, I don't think that the teams are getting any kind of a percentage cut based on the.
How long is that going to last?
Well, that's once again, how big does that pile of money have to get until they want it?
Well, that's all. That's the trick. Because we had this problem in the NBA. Don't forget. Oh God, the name has escaped me. The ref
McDonaghy.
Thank you, McDonaghy, and he proved to be a complete scumbag.
It might have just been Donaghy.
It was Donaghy. It wasn't McDonaghy. You're right. It was Donaghy. And Donaghy went to prison. He was a bad guy. He was involved with some corrupt, people, and he was fixing NBA games as much as a referee could with foul calls and stuff. So, I mean, it's happened. And yes, that was an outlier. But I just think I'm concerned that the more you let the MGMs of the world get into cahoots with teams, the possibilities there of at least the perception of corruption. And when that happens, because people already think the NBA is fixed, for example.
Well, it might be. Here's my question is, does the formalization of a gambling partnership actually increase the odds of game fixing? Or, I mean, because the money's there anyway, and whether it's dark money or whether it's transparent, it's a lot of money. And we've, throughout the history of sport, we've seen games get fixed. We've seen point shaving. These things are happening. We know that they have happened in the past. We don't know of any mechanism that has prevented it from continuing to happen. Is the formalization of the relationship actually making that more likely to happen, or does it? I mean, does it really? Where's the greater incentive now?
I don't think it. Before? I don't think it helps. It most certainly doesn't help. It makes it more likely in some respect.
Well, except for that there's just probably at this point a lot of legitimate money to be made. So in many ways, you're just opening up the markets and areas for legitimate money to be generated. So you could make the argument that by bringing this level of sports gambling, which has always happened, at the better to bookie level, and has always happened at the scandal to fix level, you're just legitimizing so much of that business that enough people are going to want to make the mounds of money legitimately, and then the diligence to break up the crooks is now going to be more intense and more overt in the league. Anyone out there want to make a funny meme to go along with our show? Maybe I will. I don't know. But I was reading Gary Bettman's comments about, he said, well,
Gary Bettman
NHL
being
commissioner,
the
yes.
commissioner
So
of the
commenting
NHL.
on that contract, said about MGM Resorts, well, we're just going to have to trust them. And I want someone to do the split screen meme with Bettman in that quote, and the right side, that clip from Goodfellas of De Niro and Sorvino and Liotta laughing hysterically. You remember that clip? So it's going to put the onus on all involved who want to make that legitimate money to be extra diligent and get the stuff broken up. But I think you're about the same level that's always been there, and more people are just going to be able to make money legitimately.
So just to jump, I agree with you, Chris. And generally, so for those who don't know, I tend to lean sort of progressive socialist left. I do believe that the right way to go is to legitimize it. I sort of feel from this is a business show. I think about that the same way I think about marijuana. If you legitimize it, then you can put some controls around it. You can make tax revenues off of it. A lot of people can make money legitimately. It gives people it's one other avenue that people have available to them as a line of work to go into to make money. And we all know there's a lot of money there. And if you can legitimize that money, that means that you can, communities can get some revenue out of that money. People can get jobs out of that money. These are good things. And especially when you're talking about something that's, existed since the dawn of money and is going to happen anyway, you may as well make it something that's acceptable. People aren't breaking laws to do it. And people aren't, able to hide the money as well as they did in the past.
Well, and let me make something clear. John and I are friends, but we have different opposing views on a lot of things. And this is not a case of me thinking people out there shouldn't bet. If you want to bet, knock yourself out. I don't really care. It's not my job to police you and what you do necessarily. My problem with this is twofold. Number one, I don't think the federal government should be encouraging vices. But more than that, my fear of when you marry gambling and sports has always been the perception of legitimacy of the sport, because perception is reality in many cases. And I don't think that it's a good thing if the sports get to the point, we're just in the infancy of this. One deal with the Jets and the NHL isn't going to amount to a hill of beans compared to what's coming, the tidal wave that's coming with this. And my problem with this is if the public gets the impression that these sports are corrupt, then the sport itself is damaged. And if the sport itself is damaged, then, the whole thing can collapse in and of itself at some point. And that's my problem with marrying up sports and gambling like this. Yeah, it's all, people have always bet. People are going to always do it. But when the league is directly involved, I think it sets a bad precedent, with the public. That's my fear with this. And yes, there's a ton of money to be made, and they're going to do it. It's the whole Scrooge McDuck thing that, John mentioned is absolutely right, of course. So it's going to happen. I just think these leagues need to be careful about the way they go about this so as to prevent this perception of corruption. That's my problem with this.
I have two things maybe before we move on, although you're obviously welcome to respond. One is, what's really interesting here is that for the NFL, well, first of all, I think cynicism is already high on these sports leagues to begin with. So, last I checked, I clicked into the World Series and there's A-Rod as the number one, studio host guest. So
He's good.
Fine, but I think there's a degree of callous on the fan base around. You said people already, everyone rolls their eyes at every foul in the NBA finals too, right? So there's already a healthy amount of cynicism on all these sports. So maybe this just helps to kind of harden that scab. That'll be interesting to see, and none of us can predict that. What's interesting, kind of away from the specific gambling and sports aspect for the NFL here, is that this is luxury boxes 2.0, because this is direct to franchise revenue. The Jet, so far the Jets signed a contract with MGM, not the NFL, and all that revenue they're going to bring in through these specialized gaming things with that partnership. That's all like a personal seat license or a skybox. These are direct revenue to franchise moves, which we know in the NFL economic model is, worth twice as much than the shared revenue in a lot of ways in terms of what they go after.
Yeah, well, it's what's important to note is that we don't know really how the revenue is split in this Jets contract. We don't know if the Jets are getting a percentage of the net gambling revenues, of the gross gambling revenues, or they're being paid a flat fee. I know, John, you said that you thought.
But we know it's going to the Jets. It's not revenue shared.
No. I mean the shared gambling, right? Because MGM is taking in the contract could say whatever net or gross we make, the Jets are gonna get some percentage of it. I mean, it could be structured like that.
Yeah, my understanding is that they're getting a flat fee for the rights to use the game or the rights to use the stats or something along those lines. They're getting basically a licensing fee.
Because you're basically going to be able to bet on it's third down. Which excites me, if I'm honest. You and your buddies can sit there and say, I call play action to a numoi. Boom, you put, and you lock that into the system. So it's all about
on third down
play-by-play stuff. They're going to say I'm putting sack fumble this quarter.
I think he was questioning your play call.
Yeah, you don't go play action on third down unless it's 3rd and 1. Maybe you get away with that. If you're
I'm not saying I would win the bet. I'm saying that I'm agreeing with you. That's the licensing for that activity that is actually the Jets part of it.
Yes.
Well, yes, and that's true. That's certainly the best way to go about it in terms of the Jets. But what's next? That's my problem with this. Is what's next? It's. I think this is a slippery slope type argument. The slippery slope is a buzzword in the legal community. And I think it applies here because if the Jets want to license their name to MGM Sports or whatever offshoot it was, because it wasn't the principal party wasn't just MGM Sports, I don't think, was it? It was somebody else. But anyway, that's fine. But I think that whatever is coming with this is not going to be beneficial in terms of the perception of reality.
Yeah, the slippery slope I think you're referring to is an overall normalization of gambling. Whereas right now, gambling is sort of it's frowned upon as a vice. It's looked down, but it is for some people it's a very unhealthy activity. There are people who do become addicted to gambling, who lose everything, who screw up their families, et cetera, et cetera. There are tons of sob stories about that. Always will be, and I can see a legitimate concern that if we put gambling with money into the palms of everybody who has a cell phone and an interest in a sporting event, that money's going to be firing everywhere. Some will win, some will lose. But if you normalize it, make it easy, remove the barriers to it, it becomes more prevalent in society. Is that good for society? Is it bad for society? I don't know. But I can see where the concern is.
Yeah, and that's my point. And I just don't like the idea of normalization of vices, and this is the concept. My worldview is different than, your worldview and Chris and John, and that's fine, and people can agree to disagree. But that's my overall fear with it, is why are we normalizing, I know why we're doing, because there's a lot of money to be made, but is normalizing that behavior really a good thing for the business? Ultimately and in the long term, and I don't know.
Only time will tell there. And it was the Jets with MGM Resorts. It was.
Oh, it was? Okay. I thought it was another entity, but anyway, yeah.
Here's why I think it's going to be okay for the business. I think that it's as you mentioned. I think Chris opened with this with the show. It's happening across various sports, right? We have the NHL, we have the NBA, we have NFL. And if it happens sort of ubiquitously across all of the different sports, within a short period of time, then what are we worried about? Are we worried that people are going to lose interest in all sports together simultaneously, and therefore it's bad for sports in general? Or I think that the society will evolve.
All right, so this is a story that I think will just continue to give. This is not the final word on this, as we are kind of just starting to break into the Wild West on this, as Steve is talking about. So we're going to move on. We're going to move on to what a week at the University of Maryland. Lot going on here. Steve, why don't you give us a quick introduction here? You got the legal aspect, then we can jump into. And we're really going to look at, I think, their week here, not necessarily all the implications of the issues and scandal.
Yeah, because this goes back a long ways, and Chris and I neither of us could remember if we've talked about this before. I thought we had, maybe we hadn't. But the general gist of this thing, just as background, is that Jordan McNair was a freshman at the University of Maryland, recruited football player, and during spring practice, May 29th, ended up showing signs of exhaustion. He collapsed and was taken to the hospital, and a couple weeks later died of the resulting trauma to his body. And at first, the University of Maryland kind of played this off as, what a tragedy, we're so sorry. And then ESPN in July broke a story that ripped the Band-Aid off this thing and ended up exposing what they described as a toxic culture at the University of Maryland, led by head coach DJ Durkin, or now former head coach DJ Durkin, and realized that Durkin was live at the practice when this happened and allegedly directed via expletive and insult to the players to drag McNair across the finish line because they were doing wind sprints, 110-yard wind sprints at the time. And so that's what happened. And so then the university got involved and did an investigation. And this is where the bad comes in. Because what the university did, there was apparently a disagreement. The university president, who's Lowe was his name. Gosh, I had his first name right in front of me. Anyway, Lowe thinks Durkin needs to be fired. The University Board of Regents directed him not to fire Lowe. And this is where this week comes in, because that happened this week. The investigation is complete. A whole bunch of people were suspended during this time, including Coach Durkin. And basically the entire, sporting media world out there thought that Durkin probably needs to be fired because he's in charge. He owns this whole thing. The Board of Regents was the only one on the face of the earth that disagreed. And so they announced that Durkin wouldn't be fired. And then just one day later, 24 hours later, the president, Lowe, fires him anyway. And, in direct contradiction to what the Board of Regents wants. And Wallace Lowe is his name. And so Wallace fires Durkin 24 hours after the Board of Regents announced he wouldn't be fired. It's just a complete and total mess. It's a case study in how not to handle bad publicity when you're a major organization. It's demonstrates a complete callousness towards and obliviousness towards a culture promoted by the head coach that allowed a player to die in this fashion. My initial thought, my very, very first thought in this was that Durkin's contract must be structured in such a way that this didn't count as a default of his contract, meaning that the university would have to pay him out once, if they fired him. That was the very first thing that went through my head. Well, Amy Trask, who, if you're out there, I've been trying to get you to come on this show. We haven't made that happen yet. But I went back and forth with Amy Trask on this on Twitter, Amy being the former executive with the Raiders. And she said, no, this is a classic, case. This is a classic case of default, meaning there's no question that it would be a for-cause firing. And so that, and if she's right, and I don't doubt her, I mean, she's been in this world for decades, if that's the case, then I just can't imagine what the University Board of Regents was thinking by not firing Durkin, and what would prompt Wallace Lowe to go against him and fire him. So it's amazing to me how badly University of Maryland screwed this up. It's amazing how bad they harmed their reputation. The students themselves and the players themselves were threatening to walk out and boycott, and it became a huge mess. So before I keep rambling.
Well, one thing also is Brady, who is the Board of Regents chair, I don't know official title, but whatever, head of the Regents, he's also now out as well.
Right. Yeah. So what thoughts do you guys have on this mess?
So, we were talking before when we were talking about gambling, about the possibility that the activity was going to have a negative effect on the sport. I think one thing, so this kind of thing seems to come up pretty often, right? Whether it and when I say this kind of thing, what I'm referring to is sort of the abuse of players. Whether it is this case where somebody was physically at their end, but there was this, you know how it is in sports. If you don't push yourself beyond your personal limit, then you're not going to be able to, you're not going to be able to succeed. You won't be Adrian Peterson unless you go that extra mile, do that extra thing, whatever it is. There is no concept of a limit on your body. You have to imagine or pretend that you have no limits and go for forever. And that's why this kid died, right? Is that he was physically finished. It was too much. And where the focus is right now, and what we're talking about today, is University of Maryland. Well, who was at fault? Who's to blame? Who should be fired? Who shouldn't be fired? And my thought on this is that that's the wrong approach to take in general. I understand that's the approach that is being taken, and it's how we handle everything, right? Penn State, who's responsible? Who needs to get fired? Should we shut down the football program? What should the punitive reaction be to what happened that was bad for the kids at Penn State? What should the punitive reaction be that, in reaction to what happened to McNair at USM? And I feel like that philosophy of what is the most effective way to punish the organization at which the incident happened is a bad approach, because it's that approach that prevents people from bringing up and raising alarms, right? You don't get whistleblowers, because the result, if you blow the whistle, you're putting your college's football program at risk. You're putting your coach at risk. You're putting the athletic director at risk. You're putting yourself at risk. You're opening the door. If I say, hey, I think this kid's being pushed too hard, I need to blow a whistle, I need to raise a flag here, this is wrong, then the result is I'm going to be the guy responsible for having my football program shut down and everybody fired. And so I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to watch that kid die, or I'm going to watch these kids get abused, or something like that. So I think that we need to change the mindset with which we respond to these kind of tragic things to a mindset that is, okay, this happened within the structure of your program. What do we need to do to monitor your program or to monitor other people's programs to make sure this kind of thing isn't happening, rather than punish you and take your program away and give everybody else a reason not to say when something bad is happening? How about instead we put together some sort of a framework by which we have people making sure that these kinds of things aren't happening, and we can use your program to start because we know that it's a program that didn't prevent this kid from dying.
That's sweet. It really
Thank
is.
you.
But
Thank
it's
you.
also
These are the thoughts that I have, everybody. I apologize. You may not be used to this.
but it's sweet, but it's totally wrong, in my opinion. No, listen. I mean, number one, Durkin is the man in charge. He was, he's the head coach. He let this happen. He's responsible. He needs to go. Period. Dot. The end. And also, there's more practical reality to this. As a head coach of a major Division I football program, he has to recruit. He has to walk into people's living rooms and go, listen, my program is best for your son. I promise to take care of your kid. We're going to watch over him. We're going to develop him as a person. If you let him come to the University of Maryland, how in God's green earth can you possibly let that coach walk into your living room and recruit your son knowing that a guy died thanks to his lack of oversight. That's what the University of Maryland was facing. They would have zero credibility as a recruiting entity. I'm just my mind is blown that the Board of Regents didn't see that. I don't. You can recruit effectively if you have a new coach that says, "Listen, that was in the past. It was another. That was another administration. I'm here now, and trust me." You can pull that off if you have a new coach. But if you have Durkin doing that, it's just impossible.
That's ultimately why he's been fired, right? I mean, he's out. They'll bring somebody else in. But my point is, how do we know that the next guy is not going to do the same thing?
Because how many people in college football have died over the past 20 years? That I can tell you. It's is there none? Is it none? I don't remember another case like this. In which a player died in the middle of practice as a result of
it actually happens more in high school because you don't have the checks and balances at that level.
Exactly. Exactly right.
The thing that you said that's really interesting to me, because I think we all agree he should have been fired back whatever it was in July. That
I'm not sure John agrees, but yeah.
Whether or not he is fired is less relevant to me than whether or not the kids.
Right. So you would have, but then you would have. So, but I understand that we're maybe over punitive, but you probably if it would have he was felt if he was part of the problem of that advancing that safety framework, then he would need to go. But the real, as Steve says, the real conflict here was between the president and the regions, and then back when they decided to kick off the 3-month study or investigation, and now what happened at the end of it. So I want to go to root causes here, and so what I think we start to think about why and how the regions acted as they did goes back to the last very bad, no good, stupid decision that the University of Maryland did, which was to leave the ACC and go to the Big Ten, which put the pressure on big college football, which led to having the kind of catch-up culture that would push harder. Durkin was a Big Ten guy. That decision was a complete football decision, laid waste to the basketball program. So that to me starts to give me a playing field for why the regions because they wanted and they needed to, and they had to double down on getting into that Big Ten level of football for money, right? We can always you peel that back to that, of course. And so now they keep making bad decisions about bad decisions because they're covering up for their original sin, which was that jump and the intensity and the catch-up culture of the football program got them there, and it's why they didn't want to have to admit that any of that was a mistake. That's why we get this kind of stacked deck of bad decisions.
Yeah, I mean, we are a part of the Hogside Network on this show, and as a result of that, at least the beginning, the core group of listeners is probably more DC centric than not. And so I think a lot of you out there probably follow the University of Maryland football pretty closely. What Chris is saying was 100% right. And you won't hear me say that too much about Chris, believe me. But he's 100% right, and it's a connection I really hadn't thought about, before you said it. Because University of Maryland, 100% jumped to the Big Ten to make more money. There's more fees to be had. There's a Big Ten network. They want more money. They don't really care particularly. I mean, they'd rather have a more prominent football program than not, but that's not what it's about. It's about the fees that the Big Ten generates. And so, yeah, I mean, they hired DJ Durkin as a Big Ten guy to try to, I was about to say normalize, but that's not the right word, legitimize the University of Maryland program in terms of Big Ten, and so that's what is the root cause of the toxic culture. I mean, that's a good point. You can't dispute that. Can't dispute that at all. So once again, we've tied all this back to money, folks, because everything's about money. Congratulations, world.
And if there's anything else we know really well about, it's making bad decisions.
Mm-hmm. Everything's bad decisions. In the field. But just think about this, though. What's really, it's just coming from a military guy, career military guy like me. What has happened here is we've had Wallace Lowe, who's the president, whose superiors told him, no, we're not going to fire him. And then 24 hours later, he goes, no, I'm going to fire him anyway. That is just, that's mind-boggling to me. That would happen, and that he felt so strongly about what was right. And not only that, then the next day, the chairman, president, head, leader of the Board of Regents is gone. That's that just shows you what a completely screwed up situation this was. And the truth of the matter is, DJ Durkin should have been gone in July. There wasn't a need for any of this to happen. He should have been gone in July, and we wouldn't have been in this situation. And the University of Maryland, it would have been bad. There's going to be a lawsuit. The family of Jordan McNair, by the way, filed some sort of notice with the court that preserved their right to file a lawsuit. Not quite sure what they're talking about exactly. I haven't had time to look it up. But point is, there is going to be a claim coming. 100% for sure. And it's just a matter of how much money the university pays his family, because that's going to be the result. And so they could have focused on that and not had this whole big scandal had they just fired the coach 2 months ago.
I thought that I could have this wrong. I thought that they sort of suspended the coach while they were doing the investigation.
Well, they did, but there wasn't a need for that. I mean, why did they have to suspend him?
He deserves some due diligence. I mean, if it hadn't. I'm just saying, just sort of as a fan of there being some sort of due process, the idea that they're going to take a look and see what happened before they fire the guy.
The only thing that really matters
ultimately
is what his
he got
contract
fired.
says. The only thing that matters is what his contract says.
Well, legally, sure, but but we're talking about more than that, right? We're talking about things like perception and stuff like that.
If they had gotten rid of him in July or August, we wouldn't have had this scandal today.
No, but they've gotten rid of him now. So do we still have a scandal, or is the scandal they didn't get rid of him fast enough?
I think there is the damage that the University of Maryland has done to its reputation as an institution is severe.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And all of that was avoidable. If they had just cut bait immediately, they could have. The play would have been then to say it's a tragedy. We will forever remember Jordan. But we've done the right thing here, and we're going to move on, and then we're going to make sure the family's taken care of, and that would have been the end of it, and we would have forgotten about it by now.
One Elite Eight run by UMD men's basketball this spring, and it's gone anyway. It's also, which is actually it sort of compounds their PR mistakes, because they didn't realize they could have just taken a version of Hit It, a couple months ago and moved on. So they've exasperated that. But we also know that these things will eventually blow over.
So I would advise the University of Maryland to hire the Hogsty Network as its PR agency, because we could have solved this for you without having a big controversy.
Don't bring me in on that. You guys are going to, over the weeks,
except John.
As you guys continue to hear from me over the weeks, and I'm a regular part of the show, one of the things that you're going to learn about me is I am not a big proponent of the amount of money that goes into college sports. I think that I think that the colleges exist to give people educations. It's become a major source of revenue. I get why they do it. I just don't think it's a healthy system.
That's why you're on the show.
All right, well, let's learn a little bit more about you as you introduce our next subject, which is the rise of eSports. So you want to give us a little bit of a primer here, and then we'll jump into it?
Sure. So another thing about me, I started my career back in AOL in the mid-'90s. I have stayed since then. So I've been doing now online sports games, largely as a producer / designer for over 20 years now.
John is, if everybody doesn't know, John is the one that's making most of the money on Red Dead Redemption 2. I'm trying to kill 5 cougars now with a bow and arrow. It's damn near impossible. And it's not like today where you can just, you go down to a coffee shop and find some middle-aged women and draw your bow. It's easier today. But back in the 1800s, it was a pain in the ass. So I've been doing online video games for forever, and the reason why I fell in love with video games from an early age. I used to be a big book geek. I loved reading sci-fi, fantasy, that kind of thing. I also loved watching Redskins. When I first played a video game where I was able to control the action that was happening, I felt like I was reading a book where I could participate in the story, and therefore video games for me instantly became a much better form of entertainment than television or movies or anything where I was a passive participant in somebody else's story. So that being said, we fast forward now to 2018 or whatever year it might be.
And we have a system going on now where the internet is capable of running games at speed. It is a massive, massive industry. I think that Red Dead Redemption has exceeded. It's made something. We're talking about billions of dollars in a very short period of time. I think that they've topped $1 billion. If they haven't, they're going to.
It was 750 million like last week, I think. So it's
Yeah,
probably
so
close.
it's over $1 billion now.
Yeah.
And this is just on the initial sales. We're not even talking about years of microtransactions, subscriptions, things like that. There's a lot of money to be made in video games. Is the point I'm
Tell me
trying
why
to make.
tell me why esports is a sport, because I'm a cynic. Okay,
Here we
to me,
go.
sport to me, if you're sitting playing a video game, it's not a sport. It's a game, and it's a form of entertainment, and there may be money to be made in the economy via entertainment, but it's not a sport. That's the way I look at it.
So here's why it's a sport, Steve. What we're talking about are highly skilled individuals. These are people with incredible talents that are extremely hard to understand and virtually impossible to replicate. They train, they follow a regimen, they have to practice. These are people who are playing in teams. So there are individual esports, but what we're talking about here is the rise of esports leagues, sponsored teams. In fact, a lot of the teams that are being sponsored these days are now being sponsored by traditional sport teams. So you'll find situations where an NFL team or an NBA team has an affiliation with an esports team, sponsors that team. The reason, of course, being revenue, like the reason for everything else. But these are not kids just nerding out with Cheetos in their home. These are kids. Some of these kids are making. Some of the top athletes have made $2 million.
I'm sorry, did you just say athlete?
Athletes. These are virtual athletes. So now you can say,
This is me virtually beating my head against a brick
well,
wall.
no, and I get it. And we can go back to whether or not John Daly's an athlete, right? Was Babe Ruth athletic? He could hit a ball a mile, which was good. Does that make him an athlete? LeBron.
Yes.
James, well, LeBron James might be a different kind of athlete than Babe Ruth or John Daly. And some of these kids, if you try to compete with them in any of this stuff, you're going to get fried. Everybody
I don't
will
doubt
get
that.
fried.
I don't doubt that.
Yeah.
Look, this story popped into my head because I saw a story earlier this week where Walmart was putting in something called esports arenas in Walmart. Right. Now, I'm picturing arena being a massive screen in the corner of Walmart with a bunch of seats around it so people can watch. So I'm assuming that's what it is. But what's interesting is that now Walmart is getting into this because they're selling. Presumably, well, I assume Walmart. I know they sell games, and presumably they sell the game machines as well, the PS4 or whatever else the case may be. So Walmart's trying to drive revenue by bringing gamers into the store, and they can see their heroes, Ninja and so forth. Because I know he's the top guy.
Well,
so I do know something about this.
Depends on what game you're talking about, but yeah, okay. Ninja's getting a lot of airtime right now.
Okay, all right. So, but anyway, so presumably they can go watch their gaming heroes and then go buy the games, and that's kind of the idea for Walmart.
Well, so I think that the idea is that eSports Arena is a brand, and we used to have. So when I worked at NCSoft,
it's a brand.
Yeah.
See, this is why I'm glad you're here.
So I'll tell you this: the arenas. So within a Walmart, I think you're probably right. There's going to be some section with a large screen and some seating, and people can do this. You can buy eSports Arena branded gaming PCs. They have it's called the overpowered gaming PC, and that's a super tricked out PC that's going to let you play games awfully fast. But when we talk about eSports arenas, they are filling big halls. These are you will see I don't know what it is, probably 15,000 people. 20,000 is my guess. I could look it up. I haven't looked it up. Overwatch League is the league that I follow most closely because my son plays Overwatch. He's a very good player. And so we've been following that. The finals in New York were it was an amazing spectacle. I don't know how many people there were, but it was huge. It was, they're packing in like rock concert numbers of people. to these things. And amongst the demographic, so teenagers and young adults, sort of post millennials, these people are more attracted to esports than they are to football, baseball, hockey. Those are
sad.
old people sports.
So sad.
You're an
Chris,
old
is
person.
esport? Is this a sport?
I like all this stuff, so I'm not anti any of it. I don't have a big dog in the fight. I think it's all more of a sport than golf.
Chris just said you're wrong. It's a sport.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's a sport. I don't think they're athletes, if that makes sense. So, because I think a sport, and especially what they're trying to do with esports as a frame and a model, is to map traditional revenue streams of competition over something that there's a lot of interest in, and it is in fact competitive. So sports are the framework that all of us have: ticket sales, viewership, stars, highly skilled at specific things. Those are all the frameworks of sports, about how you package that, why you make it watchable, yada yada. So I think that can all be relevant. And if I'm watching, StarCraft, two StarCraft teams battle or whatever, and I've seen that live, and it was compelling. I see the entertainment value. So I think it's a sport the way we think about things that way. To call these guys and gals athletes, in the same way that you do that, where it's based on a more of a physical competition. I think that gets a little bit gray. Steve, I can see your point, but
I want to clarify the athlete. So I think that the reason they get called athletes is because that is the word that we have for people who participate in sports. I don't think that there's another word in our lexicon to use to describe, what
competitors.
I'd call them gamers,
competitors.
So, but there's a difference there between, I'm a gamer, right? But I can play football. I'm not a football player. I can play games. That makes me a gamer. Everybody's a gamer. You played a game, you're a gamer. Yeah.
That's what these guys are doing. I have a really hard time. I just can't, in good conscience, call them. They're not athletes. These people are playing a game, sitting in a chair. They're not There's no way they're athletes.
I will challenge you to follow a season of an esport and then have the same opinion. I believe that you have that opinion because you haven't. I'm guessing. You could correct me, but I'm guessing that you haven't tried to follow anything.
Oh, of course not. I'm not saying that. And listen, these are skilled individuals. I don't doubt that. And the big picture here, Chris said the big picture. The big picture here is, if there's money to be made in this, it's that if people are going to fill arenas and, watching people play these games, there's a business model to be had. You could have leagues, you could have broadcasts. All of that. I get that. I don't dispute that at all. If we're just talking about athletes, you're not an athlete if you're sitting in a chair holding a video game console. Sorry, you're not an athlete.
We can get into the semantics of the word athlete. I don't think
that's really not what we're
the conversation though. Yeah. So in terms of revenue, I did look up a little bit. So esports is projected to make $900 million this year, which is a good amount of money. That's up 38% from last year. So we're talking about the growth of the industry. Going up 38% from 900 million or to 900 million. The last projected that I saw is that in the next decade it's going to be a $10 billion industry, which is no chump change. So I don't think that's going away. I think it's only going to grow from here, and I think that it does become. ESPN showed the Overwatch League finals on ESPN. Which
ESPN 1?
I don't know which one, but it might have been. It could have been. It could have been the legitimate channel of
Is
ESPN.
Overwatch a game or a league?
It is it's a game and it's a league. So there's the Overwatch League is a league in which people are competing in the game Overwatch, which is
that's right. So it's a game. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Overwatch is a game. Okay. Yeah. So the point here, we're gonna just not agree on the athlete thing, and that's not really the point.
Yeah.
The point here is that this is going to be something we're going to see more of. 900 million, I believe, is more gross revenue than the WNBA, for example. I think on an annual basis. So it's not going away. And if ESPN is involved in broadcasting the Who's He What's It finals, and it did well, they're going to do it again.
Yes.
And at some point there's going to be, annual broadcast rights that people are going to fight over. And once it gets branded as a sport, I don't think it's a sport. And we're going to disagree on that, too, and that's fine. But once it's branded as a sport in the public lexicon, this is going to go into the arena of Fox Sports 1 and ESPN, and then that'll become, if that's the way it's branded, which is sort of the way it's going, then the future of 5, 6, 7, 10 years from now is going to be that the hope is that would become a regular part of the sports lexicon. And when you hear, Golick and Wingo in the morning or whatever, or Dan Patrick in the morning, then he's going to cover as a part of his show eSports. So that's probably the hope.
I think that that's the right direction, but I would actually see it a little bit different from the way that the traditional, you go, it all started with SportsCenter, right? We're going to talk about all the sports. At the same time, we're going to go from tennis to golf to hockey to whatever. And what's interesting is I think that the esports is a little bit different because its viewer base doesn't watch television for the most part. Its viewer base isn't tuning into radio shows. It's not looking at traditional media. The way that people watch it is almost exclusively through sites like Twitch, through the new media revenue, or the new media sort of sources, YouTube channels, podcasters, things like we're doing here. This is how people consume that entertainment. So and the second factor in this is that these are folks who have been largely, looked down upon by traditional sports. They haven't been welcome in that space. Listen, like you're saying, it's not a real sport. You guys aren't athletes. You're not really a part of what we're talking about here. I don't think that they're looking to get onto ESPN and Fox at that level to be seen side by side. I don't think that's a goal. I think that they would much rather be in their own space. Now, whether ESPN or Fox go ahead and figure out some way of capturing and distributing that information and branding it, I think they will do that. But I don't think this is something we're going to see Mike Golick talking about. I think that it's going to be, if not forever, for a very long time, kept separate from.
If we see media stars around the coverage of esports, and we will, right? Because that goes hand to glove to the rise of viewership and interest, etc. It's going to be much more in fact, they probably already have it, but it'll be, Xbox One, direct through console channel, where you'll start to see those kind of things come through, or, even, there's so much fracturing of the entertainment option universe anyway. They'll link onto one of those middle hanging fruit ones and just build a direct to consumer brand and media package around one of those channels.
I think we can sum this up because I know we're running out of time. If I know who Ninja is, that means there's a future. There's a future to it. You can call it what you want. Call it a sport. Call it not a sport. Call them athletes. Call them not an athlete. But the future of this is bigger and brighter. I think that's what we can take from this. If I know who Ninja is, that means that there's a future to it.
Everybody here on the East Coast, shout out to my Philadelphia Fusion fans. If you're into that, you probably aren't if you're listening to this show.
I don't know who the Philadelphia Fusion is.
I'm gonna convert you guys. You're gonna be wearing the orange and black. You're gonna be fans.
Well, let's start with what sport they're playing.
They play Overwatch.
Oh, okay. So it's a gaming team.
It's a game. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have to help.
Steve, you're not going to be able to keep these kids off your lawn forever. Eventually, they're going to be on your lawn.
The hell I can. I've got a lot of guns, and I'm not afraid to use them.
They're better at using them. This is what they do. They shoot things for a living.
They're better at shooting it at a screen.
I'm dying to have their reflexes tested against yours.
I'm 100% confident I could outshoot all of them.
I know. That's what makes
There's
you
something
special.
that I may purchase a ticket to.
Well,
About watching me.
I'm gonna bet on it on my new gambling app.
Which we're joking, but if you can interest people to spend money to watch something, it doesn't really matter what you call it.
That's correct.
I call it entertainment. The end.
It's money. It's just business.
All right. So with that, that's right. It's just business. Thank you, John. We know, Steve, you can find somewhere in the collective brain cells of the Hogsty Twitter feed. John, where can we find you? If we can find.
Let me look that up real quick because I have no freaking
Last
idea.
time we asked him this, Chris,
Oh,
I don't know if you heard the end of it. Last time he read off a fake Twitter name.
Yeah, well, I got it wrong. That's what happened there. All right, I've now opened up Twitter and I'm looking at my Twitter handle. It's at John_Worrall, WORRALL. Feel free to hit me up, give me a shout. I will get back to you sometime in the next few weeks when I look at Twitter, which I don't do very often.
You can find me at ChrisLarry33. I probably will respond with some speed because I'm on there quite frequently. So that brings us to the close of another episode. See you in 2 weeks.
See ya.